If anybody has any, if there's anything that comes up that I need to address in the comments, if somebody can let me know, because I actually can't see it at the same time as I'm doing the presentation.
I'll let you know.
Thank you. So basically I have it organized this way. I'm going to talk about what is common for different aspects of the application. I'll talk about what graduate school is like, careers in IO psychology, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So the next few slides are going to talk about some things that are common application requirements for any graduate program in psychology, at least. Things that you would probably submit to a master's program or a PhD program. The first thing, and arguably the most important thing, is going to be your undergraduate GPA. That's because the best predictor of future performance is past performance, and graduate school is harder than undergrad, so it makes sense to have GPA as a major factor, just because well, the standards also increase in graduate school, so you usually will need to have a B or above in most programs to be retained within the program. But that doesn't usually pose a problem for students that I've seen, because they're selected based on their ability to meet that criterion of a B or better. So there's undergrad GPA is a major focus, and you'll include your GPA and transcripts usually from any of the places where you've studied so far. And GPA in your major is going to matter more than your cumulative GPA. Usually graduate schools are going to be looking for a 3.3 or above, oftentimes a 3.5 or above, just to make sure that you're extra competitive. The difference in requirements between a master's and a doctoral program too, you might be allowed in with a lower GPA if you're getting into a master's program versus a PhD program, but it's hard to, it'd probably be hard to get into even a master's program with something lower than a 3.0. The criteria will differ. All these things that I'm talking about, where their threshold is of who they let in each different program is gonna, it's gonna vary. So you may be able to find where some of the cutoffs are or what's usual. And that even, even when they post those kind of things, they do vary from year to year. So just, I guess, take that into consideration too. Some courses in your transcript are going to matter more than others. In IO, we tend to place emphasis on research methods and statistics, and I think that's common to other types of graduate specializations as well. So methods and stats can be important. If you got below a C in one of those courses, you may want to think about using grade forgiveness and retaking it. Specific content courses may matter too. Like if I see a student who got a C in industrial psychology, I'd be concerned about their success in a grad program. So I'd want to know why that was. GREs are commonly required, and I think most people dread this, and that is very normal. So I'm going to talk through what some of the different components are of the GRE. Basically, there's three aspects to it. There's the GRE verbal, there's the GRE quantitative, and there's the GRE analytical. The GRE verbal and the GRE quantitative, most psych programs will emphasize those, and PhD programs may emphasize GRE more than master's programs. I think oftentimes in IO, we emphasize quantitative GRE a little bit more than verbal skills, just because that's kind of what differentiates the field from other things like management, is that research aptitude, a statistical aptitude. But so I'd say focus on the GRE verbal and the GRE quantitative. I haven't seen a lot of programs emphasizing the GRE analytic section. It used to be worthwhile a very long time ago when the test was structured differently, but right now, at least my view, is that how well you do on the GRE analytical section might even be negatively related to how you do in graduate school. And so, I mean, I don't think it's a great relationship, because the analytics section is requiring you to engage in persuasive writing. And it's a very different kind of writing than what you need to do in graduate school, which is oftentimes APA format sort of writing. And it's on a completely random topic. So in some ways, you end up kind of unteaching the writing style that the GRE wants you to do. And it's like the GRE analytics section is rated by some random people. So I'm sure they have their selection process for them, but it doesn't tend to be a very useful material also, because we have our own ways of evaluating people's writing ability, like your letter of intent. So I would say spend your time and preparation on the quantitative section and on the verbal section. Don't get carried away with studying for the analytic section. I probably wouldn't study for the analytical section personally. I would do what I can do and take the section seriously while I'm taking it, because you don't want to do so badly that it's a red flag. But I don't know of it being an important application material, particularly not in our program. We don't tend to place a lot of emphasis on it. You can usually find some minimums and central tendencies depending upon the school. So I think our recommendation is that shoot for 40% or more on the quantitative and verbal sections. That'll put you in a really good place. A lot of PhD places, they may be looking for 60% or better in both of those areas. It's a standardized test, and standardized tests are very limiting. So at least in our program, we do recognize that and consider this not a test of someone's inherent intellectual ability, because it's really not. What I see it as is a test of, yeah, there's the content in there, but the content is like geometry that you haven't seen since high school, and it's real basic. Math stuff on the quantitative section is actually a little bit easier than the SAT, less to draw from. The verbal, yeah, you need to know a lot of language. So there is that content aspect, but where it's more of a test, I think, is project management and resilience. It's not a great fun thing to go through, but the reality is that you're going to have some stressful times in graduate school and have to manage your time studying up until the big performance, whether that be some kind of presentation or a big test like the GRE, but in one of your topics. So I would encourage you to keep a growth mindset when it comes to the GRE. Think of it as a test of your resilience. Think of it as a test of how serious you are about graduate school, and study for it, study up to it, build study groups around it. I think you can make the most leeway most quickly on the quantitative section, because the content domain for that is more truncated. There's so much to know about language, but the material for the quantitative section is rather finite. I'd say also schedule the GRE early, and that way you'll have some time leading up to it. But also crazy things can happen. I've had students get seriously ill on their GRE day and not be able to take it, and they scheduled it for the very last possible date that they could schedule it before application materials were due. There's a lot of schools right now that are considering or moving away from the GRE. So they may have already moved away from it or are considering moving away from it. We're in discussion right now about the GRE as an application material. It has been one of the better predictors of graduate school performance, but it has to be considered in the context of other application materials. So different places may use it in different ways. Some programs may even look at GRE and GPA, have a minimum cutoff, and your application won't be looked at unless you meet the minimum cutoff. I'm really not sure what schools will do given COVID-19 and limitations to getting access to testing. The GRE was offered online recently just because of COVID-19, but they're talking about, I've heard that they're talking about reopening it in October. It's something that may be a required application material, but also even if it's not a required application material, it might be something that you could have to maybe give you an advantage, help you stand out in your application to have been through it. You also will usually have to submit a statement of purpose. And this is usually, so it's an assessment of your writing, but it also is a great way to evaluate a candidate's fit for the program. You'll want to talk about what interests you in going into this career field, what you intend to do with your degree. If you're applying to a PhD program especially, you'll want to talk about what faculty member you want to work with. So it's clear that you've done your homework on the program and demonstrate your passion for the fields. You also can use this as an opportunity to provide some context for your other application materials. I've had some great things come up in the statement of purpose that, as somebody who served on the application committee before, reviewing students to come into the program. Like, for example, I had a student with low GRE scores. He mentioned in his statement of purpose about what happened the day of his GRE, and that was actually corroborated in one of his letters from one of his letter of recommendation writers, that one of his best friends was actually shot the day of his GRE. And so that gives you some new perspective in looking at an applicant. I've had a few times where I have had applicants that are going back to school after having a career and kids, and I look at their application and see, well, these grades aren't very good, but it's been a long time since then and they're in a different world, or maybe they had a different major and they didn't do well in that major and it wasn't a fit for them. They talk about that in their letter, or some kind of ailment. All these kind of things are opportunities to explain why your application looks like it does, to if there's anything that you need to explain to provide context for your materials. I briefly mentioned letters of recommendation. And letters of recommendation, IO psychology studies show that they're basically invalid, that they're not really predictors of performance, yet we all require them for our applications for graduate school. You have to go through this process of getting usually 2 to 3 letters of recommendation, but in reality, most schools don't weight them very heavily in the application process, because most people can get somebody to vouch for them. Where letters of recommendation can be a really useful material is if it can give you, especially if it can highlight something that is telling you more about the candidate than would be shown on their other materials. Like, we already know that you're smart based on your GPA and your test scores. So getting a letter that says, this person did well in my class, they got an A, is not really telling me anything new. Where letters of recommendation can be really useful is things like, this person volunteered in my research lab, they were a great team player, they are very resilient and oriented towards learning. And you could get a sense of the person's character and that kind of thing. Looking at their soft skills, for example, if you can build those with a letter writer, that can give you a leg up. So ask for letters of recommendation proactively, and that means communicating with your letter writers. They probably have a lot of things going on. So I always tell letter writers to ask me a month in advance, but then also please email me to confirm the week before it's due that it's already been submitted. Because although they don't help you all that much typically in the process, they can, like I mentioned, but they can hold you back because they're a required application material. And usually organizations are, well, universities are very bureaucratic and everything goes through the graduate school typically. And if an application is not complete, it may never make it to the hands of reviewers. So just really make sure that you do a good job communicating to get your materials in on time. I'd say get that application in early because you still have to leave time for the emails to go out to your letter writers and for them to reply back. So I mentioned it's useful to pick somebody and pick a couple people that can say something more than your other application materials. That is helpful, but also it's better to have a letter from somebody who has a faculty position than it is to have other types of letters. Typically, like if you have maybe an adjunct teaching a course, that might have a little bit less weight than having somebody who has a research lab and has a faculty position. But I think what they're able to say about you as a candidate beyond the application materials is the really key thing. Jane Hallinan, Dr. Hallinan, has said before that when you ask for letters, go to the person face-to-face if you can, or maybe video chat in the present situation, and ask them face-to-face if they're willing to write you a positive letter. You sometimes will have interviews, and interviews presently aren't required for our IO Masters program. These could be face-to-face, they could be virtual, or they could be by phone. Some of the, sometimes PhD programs will do like an open house and have had face-to-face ones. They're usually looking at a bunch of different things, like your interpersonal abilities and further evaluating your fit. It's an opportunity though, and this is the one opportunity that you might have to get information. Most of the other application materials are going to be a one-way street for communication. So use this as an opportunity to find more information, asking questions about the program, and asking good questions also reflects well on you. So if you get an interview, I'd say make sure that you ask 1 or 2 questions. I've asked some of my previous students to let me know what kind of questions they've gotten when they interviewed for graduate school, and one said, "Why do you want to get a master's degree?" was an application question. Another question was, "Graduate school can be a very stressful time due to the intense statistical curriculum." I think this was for a PhD program. "How would you handle the stress of multiple stats courses? What would you do if you were falling behind your fellow classmates?" And then this other situational question, you're working on a group project and everyone in the group has a different idea and you feel strongly about the direction that you think is best. How would you handle this situation? Then give you some options and then ask you why. But not everybody requires an interview for admissions. Sometimes though you might have an interview for a position though, looking for a graduate assistant position. Graduate school, how does it differ from undergrad? Well, class sizes tend to be smaller and there's more range restriction than there is in terms of intelligence. So you're alongside a bunch of other smart, capable people that also did really well in undergrad. So you might have some range restriction on intelligence, which is maybe makes group work a little bit easier, but you still end up having some variation on personality, maybe less so on conscientiousness, but my experience is that there's definitely variability in neuroticism. People oftentimes experience imposter syndrome when getting into graduate school because it's weird going from being at the top of your class and doing really well and seeing that you're performing better than everybody as an undergrad to performing the same and you know, in the face of new challenges in graduate school. That's normal to go through those feelings of imposter syndrome. You're in a small community, that's a consequence of the smaller class sizes, but also a consequence of increased focus and opportunities to work more closely with professors. So it's always a good idea to keep that in mind, those things that you do outside the classroom, and they can really translate a lot more to work opportunities and reputation. There's more opportunity to build good reputation, and the flip side of that as well. There's a lot more work per class and a lot more readings per class. There's more focus on soft skills, like really a lot more presentation skills, teamwork skills, project management skills. You still have a lot of content focus like you probably do in your classes now, but it's bringing it up to the next level. Your classes will hopefully be a lot more interesting because you'll no longer have to do gen ed things. The stuff that you'd be taking in graduate school should really be related to your area of intended career outcome. It should be a more specialized degree. So I'm talking a little bit about careers in IO psychology. An IO psychologist it's just been a great field to be in consistently, and it's been rated as a great job to have. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that it is a growing area, and it is considered to be a bright outlook occupation. So that's nice, especially in uncertain times. If you go to psyop.org, www.psyop.org, there's so many great resources on that website. Right on the first page, you can scroll down and click on graduate student, or yeah, I think graduate students, and it has like more informational videos on applying to different programs, and it has a way that you can search for schools, etc. IO psychologists, they work in different settings. They oftentimes will work in human resources, and they might be a human resource generalist or have a bunch of different titles with that, or maybe kind of an internal consultant. You could do internal or external consulting. If you're doing external consulting, you're usually working on a contract basis for different organizations. Usually that external consulting involves some travel, but is oftentimes better paying. Often IO psychologists work in government settings doing research. For example, I'm working with Dr. Cass on a project with the Navy right now doing research to generate knowledge that will help the Navy in parachute descent. And then the Army Research Institute does a lot of, they hire IO psychologists to do work on all kinds of different things, sexual harassment, policy, teamwork, culture acclimation, all kinds of things. You can also go on and get your doctorate and do really any of the things listed here, but it is required to really work in academics in a faculty type position. You need your doctorate. And because a PhD is more of a research degree, doing research in general, you'd be better positioned to do that with a doctorate than you would a master's degree. Some different reasons to go into IO. Let's talk about extrinsic motivators first. Well, it pays well. It tends to be pretty flexible. You can work on a bunch of different projects. There's usually room for growth. So there's different levels of positions that you can get to in most types of IO work. Like you can get different statuses of consulting levels, and even like if you get your doctorate, you could, especially if you get your doctorate, you could become a human resource manager or an expert consultant. Because of the availability of jobs and the growth of the field, there tends to be career security, maybe less job security because consulting companies are just constantly buying each other out. But even if you get laid off, you can usually very quickly find another job, even as a consultant. There's intrinsic motivators too. You can really feel like you have an impact. If you can do things that will make the worker's life better, that's awesome. People spend so much of their time at work, and it can have such an impact on them and to the people that they love as well. There's job autonomy. You usually get to have a pretty good amount of discretion on how you approach projects, and sometimes even which projects you approach, but that may depend upon particular positions. You have the ability to constantly learn new things, and you're always working with people from different backgrounds, and that's true in the different job settings that I mentioned. But like, for example, if you're doing job analysis, you get to interview people about their jobs and just get to know a little bit about so many different things, and the projects are really varied. And even in academics, you get to work with people from all different backgrounds. IO is such a multidisciplinary field, and most problems nowadays require some multidisciplinary solutions because our problems today are so complex. So with a master's degree, you typically have a more applied focus in your career. You can work in most of the IO settings that I mentioned. You may be competing with people with their MBAs, but where IO is different and what makes you marketable is that background in research and your approach in research. And oftentimes IO psychologists are appreciated because of their quantitative skills becoming more and more important and more focused on data. If you get your doctoral degree, it might give you more opportunity for career mobility. Like you'd be more eligible for top ranking positions, and you would be doing more research focused work if you're actually using the skills that you gleaned. But the difference between a master's and a doctoral degree in IO is mostly stats classes, mostly stats and methods classes. You can, it could be helpful to get your doctorate if you know you want to do research and you know you want to do external consulting, because a lot of times the companies are outsourcing to somebody external because they don't have the talent in-house. If it'll be usually something that's either going to be something heavily litigated like selection, or else something really complicated statistically. We have an IO psychology program, and I'm coordinating the IO track. Our program's, I think, a really good one. We are the second in applied experiences, the fifth in overall quality, and we were in the top 10 for practical skills and resources in some of the recent rankings of programs. Our program is one of the older programs. We've been around for a while, so as a result of that, we have a lot of people that have gone through our program and have been successful in their careers, so that helps build, the alumni network can be helpful. Students oftentimes in our program go on and do applied work, but we've had some students go on for their doctorate as well. And if you want to apply to our IO program, currently we're looking at a February 1st deadline. And I mentioned the suggestion for GRE scores, but that we're still discussing that. You'll need 2 letters to support your application, a letter of intent and a strong GPA. It's always a good idea to apply to multiple programs because you may not get in because maybe applications are particularly competitive that year. Maybe there's something that happened with your application, something that you need to work on. So it could be something on the applicant side, but it also could be something not on the applicant side, especially at programs where you're applying to work with a faculty member. That faculty member may or may not be accepting students that year. So just hedge your bets and always apply to more than one place. I would say too, particularly if you're applying to a program like here, you want to do a good job with self-monitoring and make a good impression on faculty so that they can feel comfortable that you have the skills and that you're at a level where you're really ready and poised to be successful in graduate school. Sometimes there's opportunities to try out IO and to develop some rapport, like for example, working in a research lab, or there's been a couple of times where we've been able to have undergraduate students join a graduate course, and that can really give you an idea of what it's like to be in graduate school and might even be beneficial for getting you some credits that are transferable. If that's something that interests you, reach out to professors and feel free to email me to talk about that. And that's what I wanted to share with you, and then answer some questions for you as well.
Yes, you can either type your questions if you want, or if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, you could do it that way as well.
I'm currently a junior here, and I'm looking to apply next year, but would you recommend doing your Bachelor of Science in Psychology or Bachelor of Arts in Psychology to go into IO?
It depends a little bit on what the distinction between a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Arts degree varies by institution. So and what differs, one of the big things that differs here at UWF is your methods training. It is helpful to have an extra methods course, but another thing that can differ between the BA and the BS is how much hard science, biology, chemistry type courses you've had. That kind of stuff is not really going to help you in an IO program. because we don't use a lot of that in the workplace. So we look carefully at transcripts. So I guess just keep that in mind, that a BA having taken research methods and done well in research methods would be sufficient.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. If anybody's typing in comments, I don't have them in front of me.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So from what, I just want to get it straight. In the grad programs, are you saying that like most of the classes, or that there are just in general a lot of statistics involved with these higher classes?
It varies. So at a master's level, you'll usually have at least one stats and research methods class. If you're thinking about a doctorate, a lot more stats and research methods. But stats and research methods are really fundamental to a psychology graduate program because we're a science, and that's what gives our program integrity. So I would wonder about a program that doesn't teach its students how to apply stats. Like if students aren't learning that, they may, especially in IO, I would just question if the students are really prepared to be competitive in the workforce.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. When it comes to your statements of purpose, what are some things that you would consider like a kiss of death for an application? What are some things that maybe shouldn't be talked about in the statement of purpose?
I guess for me, I'm looking for writing ability. So egregious writing is that for me. And maybe this happens more for students who are thinking about like a counseling is like an overshare of information and I don't know, talking about really personal life issues and getting into a whole lot of detail about personal life issues might be a concern, but also it could be relevant. So it really just depends upon the larger context of the application. Like I mentioned that student who had the incident on the day of his GRE. That is, you know, a very personal thing to share, but also was clearly relevant. And it wasn't a tangent, you know, he still addressed all the other application things. So I would say it's a fine line. So maybe run your statement of purpose by faculty members and get some reactions to it.
Would you say is the best way to identify a professor you'd like to work with in a graduate program?
That is a really important thing to consider, especially in a program where they use a mentoring model and you are just brought in to work with that faculty member rather than as a cohort. How do you find a good mentor? Well, I guess first, it matters more if you are looking to do research. Then you might look at research interest fit, and that I think is probably the most important thing. It also might depend upon what you're trying to do. Like if you know you want to go applied, you might look for people with applied experiences. You might look to see if they're trying to take anybody on during that year. So there's a cohort model where a program accepts a whole group of people into the program. They can really work with anybody. That's how we do it at UWF. But some use a mentoring model where you're accepted into the program if you fit with a particular faculty member. So, you know, I guess it's helpful and probably in both models to try to figure out if you have fit with more than one person is nice. I would say in the cohort model, fit with more than one is better. In the mentor model, having specific research interests fit to the extent that you have specific research interests could be important. So that kind of tells you, like, do you match in terms of career goals and outcomes? But it can also be really important to find out if you're a personality match. And so that might be something that you find out later in the process. Like, you know, when I was applying for graduate schools, I went and I visited one of the campuses where I got in, and the students were very honest with me about what it was like to work with the mentor that I was interviewing with, and it made my decision not to go there. So you can ask very candid questions, and that might be a great reason to try to go and visit campus if you can. Hopefully things are getting better so that you could do that.
How different is it to apply somewhere internationally like the UK?
That's a great question. I haven't seen a lot of people apply internationally. I think part of the reason for that is because the US doesn't tend to regard international schools as highly as domestic schools, but that certainly varies by program. I mean, certainly there's a lot of respect for certain international programs. It might also vary depending upon what you really want to do. I had a student apply and get into a forensic psychology program, and I think it was like Vienna, and she was asking for the same application materials, but that's, I mean, this response is on very limited knowledge.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Morganson, for being with us today and agreeing to talk. It was very informative. I did record it, so I'll send the recording to you, and if anyone else wants it as well. Just reminding you guys again that Psi Chi has their application process open, and if you need any information on that, you can email me at vo4@students.uwf.edu, and that is until next Tuesday at 5 p.m. We're accepting applications. And be on the lookout for more of these sorts of virtual talks. We should be having one in 2 weeks, same time with Dr. Rotunda on the counseling program. So let everyone know that this is open to all psych majors and minors. And hopefully we'll see you then. Thank you guys again for joining us.
Thank you for having me and doing such a great job putting this together. If anyone has any follow-up questions, do feel free to email me, or if you're interested in the program too. Thank you.